Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Wednesday, November 4th, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. College sports is the topic today. We chat with Mizzou beat writer Souichi Terada about the Tigers' lopsided loss at Florida and the benches clearing brawl before halftime. We also evaluate the Tigers at the midseason point. After a break, the conversation shifts to Billy Tubbs, the former Oklahoma basketball coach who died earlier this week. In addition to being a successful coach who got the Sooners to the 1988 national title game, Tubbs was a character who once told fans in Norman not to throw things on the floor no matter how bad the officiating was. He also once had his team cut down nets after winning a conference championship at Kansas, the team they beat to win the title. Okay, so let's get started. What an all-star panel we have assembled here. Souichi Terada, who covers the Missouri Tigers for the Star, has joined us. Hello, Souichi.
Hi, Blair. I voted today, which was fun. I think you assumed that I was too young to not vote in 2016. That's what I assume, at least. I'm not that young, I guess. I am 23, so I voted in 16 and 18.
You're right.
Both of which were in Michigan, but now I voted in Missouri at Mizzou Arena, which was fun.
Yeah, I bet that must have been cool to do that. Not at a church or a recreation center or whatever the precinct is. But you're right. When you and I exchanged text yesterday, and I wasn't exactly sure how old you were and whether you would have voted in 2016 or even if you were of voting age, whether you did vote, but you did. And I was glad to hear that. And so you also gave away the podcast. We're running this on Wednesday, but recording it on Election Day. And so glad to hear you voted. And I know Vahe Gregorian voted. Hey, did you vote today, Vahe, or earlier?
I voted, my goodness, almost, I think 5 weeks ago at Union Station, and was in and out of there I think, parked the car at 10:37, was back in the car at 10:53. So it was pretty tidy, pretty efficient then. And I will try to do that forevermore. By the way, Blair, this might be true for you too. I can't remember. This is the 40th anniversary of my first presidential vote.
Ding, 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 ding. Absolutely.
And I won't talk too much politics, but I will say that I in that first presidential election, for reasons that sort of elude me now, but I voted for the independent.
So did I, John Anderson.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were just college rebels at the time, I think. And, down with the establishment. And
That's right. Both had mustaches.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh man, I'd love to see some photos of that.
Oh gosh, I don't know why I voted for him, except I just did, and
I think
he actually made sense. You were in college, right? Because I know I was in college.
Yeah, I was in college, and I'm pretty sure I was just trying to impress some girl.
Absolutely, it was absolutely dating material.
Oh man.
Well, it also occurs to me that we're having this conversation in the early afternoon on Tuesday, and by the time it airs, we may or may not know the outcome of the presidential election. So we'll see, and hopefully our conversation will about Mizzou football, and after a break, Billy Tubbs will put people in a good mood. I don't know what kind of mood they were going to be in, but hopefully this will help. So, hey, Souichi, let's get into it with the Tigers. It was an interesting game at Gainesville for a half, with the Tigers taking a 7-6 lead on a pick six. Great individual play, and got him in the end zone. Finally, got the offense, got Missouri on the scoreboard. They took a 7-6 lead, and I was thinking at the time, okay, Missouri's going to be okay here. They have traditionally played Florida well. For whatever reason, they just have lined up and played them well, and they'll be okay. Well, Then halftime happened, and first of all, Florida got a touchdown in before halftime, right, to make it 14, and it got a 2-point conversion to make it 14-7, and then halftime happened. So I'll let you become the play-by-play man for what happened at halftime. Just take us through the chronology of the benches clearing fight that Missouri and Florida players and coaches engaged in.
Yeah, the biggest thing is coaches, right? Just a quick clarification. Mizzou actually gave up a couple of touchdowns right before halftime, so things are already kind of falling apart as it was. I think the halftime score was 20-7. Yeah. So it was Florida went on a so long drive and then the fumble and then the touchdown, and then it was things are kind of like precarious for Mizzou to begin with. Then this brawl essentially happens, and it was essentially play-by-play, like you said, Blair. Mizzou's Trajan Jeffcoat, who rejoined the team just a couple months ago during camp, he essentially it looked like a late hit. I think some Florida fans I saw on Twitter or Reddit were kind of mad. They called it dirty. I don't know. I think it was just a traditional late hit. I think it should have gotten a flag, but that kind of sparked things. And I mean, you had a brawl, and Dan Mullen, Florida's coach, I can comfortably say now I don't think he was the reason it started, but once your coach kind of goes a little crazy and he's going after refs, and then if you look at the replay, it looks like him, Mullen, and Mizzou defensive coordinator Ryan Walters kind of gets into it for a few seconds there, and then there are a lot of punches thrown. I remember on the live viewing, I could see Markel Utsi, who was suspended after the fact. He was kind of throwing a few haymakers, so when he wasn't ejected, actually, on Saturday, I was a little surprised. So the final result, though, 3 players were ejected, 2 Florida players, Zach Carter and Antoine Powell, were ejected for fighting. Trey Williams, Mizzou's Trey Williams, was ejected for unsportsmanlike conduct. Then, after the fact, the SEC came out and announced on Monday that they were going to fine Dan Mullen $25,000, suspend 3 Mizzou players, Chad Bailey, Dylan Spencer, and the aforementioned Marco Utsi, half-game suspension. So that'll be served on the November 14th Georgia game. And then those 2 players for Florida who were ejected at halftime also have to miss the Georgia game next week. So for whatever reason, Georgia really comes out on top for this. Dan Mullen didn't look great. He's had kind of a rough few weeks. We've talked about off air a little bit, the Star Sports staff, but that was kind of the play-by-play for a very hectic. It kind of went from 0 to 100 there, honestly. Just from a late hit to a straight-up brawl, I think was kind of crazy just to witness over a few minutes span.
Well, you're right that Georgia is the beneficiary here because that's the next 2 opponents, the next opponent for each, Missouri and Florida. So players are going to have to sit out games against Georgia. And hey, if you're a Georgia fan, you're loving that. But let me ask you this, Souichi, was Jeffcoat penalized for his hit on Trask?
No, so I think that's kind of the biggest thing, and both coaches, for the record, both coaches after the fact, during their post-game comments, Drinkwitz essentially said he had his eyes on the ball because it was a Hail Mary type play, and then the hit happened. No flag came out, so I think that's what Mullen was very angry about. Dan Mullen said the same thing about how he had his eyes on the play, and he was told it was a late hit. Interestingly, he was in a full Darth Vader getup on Halloween, which is you can go look up those pictures. I highly recommend doing so. But yes, he was not penalized, and I think that's what kind of drew the ire of Florida. And then next thing you know, you have multiple players in a straight up brawl. So
okay. Now, so Mullen, as you mentioned, he got a $25,000 fine. Eli Drinkwitz was not fined for his role in this. Who was trying to play peacemaker here? Who did you notice was trying to pull players away from the brawl?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like some personnel people from both sides. I mean, the thing that kind of struck me was that Dan Mullen had to be held back by Florida coaches or personnel on his way to the refs at the beginning, and then afterwards, once the teams were kind of getting into the locker room, kind of the tail end of everything, right? Before the coaches actually got into the locker room, well, it looked like Mullen had to be held back to go talk to Drinkwitz. And luckily, like once they got together, it was generally kind of, Mullen didn't punch Drinkwitz or anything ridiculous, but it was generally kind of peaceful. Drinkwitz, he kind of admitted post game that it wasn't exactly a pleasant conversation, which I think, emotions are high and everything. So, but it was just, and then to kind of the cherry on top, I guess, of all of this is that Dan Mullen, he was essentially halfway down the tunnel, but then he actually came out to kind of pump up the crowd, which I thought was kind of, should you really be doing that? I don't know. Like it kind of makes Mullen look a little on the guiltier side, maybe, in my opinion. So that was kind of the play-by-play, and I think it kind of showed that like Mullen was kind of okay with it, and I don't know, the way he acted, and it seemed like he was maybe enabling the players a little bit. I know Florida fans, if they listen to this, will be very angry with me, but that's kind of the impression I got on first watch, and then after watching the replay multiple times, that was kind of what I took away from it. And I think that's why Mullen got fined $25,000, which is that's a lot of money.
Tell me if you guys agree with this. My basic perception of this is Mullen didn't see it, was told it happened, went out with a flamethrower, triggered the whole thing, and then doubled down with that bit coming out of the tunnel. I mean, that's certainly how I saw it. The hit, I didn't like the hit, but I didn't think the hit was flagrant. I just thought it was kind of he didn't really pull up and should have pulled up more. It wasn't like he unleashed his full force on him. But I just thought if Dan Mullen didn't do what he did, the brawl doesn't happen. I feel like that's the case.
Yeah, I think there was definitely kind of an instigator enabling vibe from Mullen. And I mean, he's had kind of a crazy few weeks. He tested positive for COVID. He said packed a swamp 90,000 strong. And I know Drinkwitz kind of had maybe a little jab during his leading up to the game. Vahe, we talked about this a little bit. Leading up to the game, Mullen was essentially did not talk injuries or COVID numbers, and Florida was on the other side of a COVID case, and Mizzou has kind of a little bit pat on the back. They've been pretty transparent with COVID numbers. So Mizzou, you look at Mizzou, and Drinkwitz has been pretty good about injuries and telling the media that. And then you look at Mullen, and he is essentially like, oh, I don't talk about that for privacy reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there was maybe a little bit of I don't want to say like anything huge, but there was a little bit of a jab back and forth a little bit leading up to the game.
Oh yeah, it was. He can be a little snarky, but I kind of liked what he did with that. I mean, I thought that was him just saying, well, if that's what they're going to do, then that's what we're going to do. And, I can see the case.
Yeah. The weird thing is actually there was a backup linebacker, Cam Wilkins, wasn't listed. So one of the other Mizzou beat writers were like, hey, is he on the team? And Drinkwitz had to be like, oh, yeah, he's fine. He's just that. I guess it was a casualty of not disclosing injuries is kind of what happened there. So that's it's just one of those, I guess it's just one of those things about college football where there, it's not the NFL where there are injury reports there are no injury designations, and it's just kind of how coaches do it. And Mullen does it one way, and Drinkwitz does it the other.
Yeah.
Well, one thing seems clear is that Florida responded better in the second half than Missouri did. Maybe you could make a case that Missouri didn't respond in the entire game to whatever Florida was throwing at them. I was a little surprised by the one-sidedness of the game, Souichi, after what I had seen from the Tigers in each of the past 2 weeks. The LSU, 2 games over 3 weeks, the LSU and Kentucky victories. Now, I think there's certainly a different perspective on LSU given what's the results of those Tigers games recently. But the Kentucky win still stands as a pretty impressive one, and for Missouri to not show better at Florida, says to me that Florida is very, very good, and maybe a top contender with Georgia in the East, and Missouri just tough game for Connor Bazelak and a team taking the road for a big road game. So you look at Florida, you look at the Tennessee road games. Missouri didn't play well in either one of those. What are we to make of where Missouri is after 5 games with 2-3 record and still thinking about a postseason? Although we don't talk much about the postseason yet, but they're thinking about postseason play.
Yeah, Blair, a couple things. I'm glad you mentioned mid-season. I guess I'll have kind of a story up in conjunction, I hope, with tomorrow with the Wednesday with the podcast, you'll be able to see it, kind of looking at maybe some surprises and everything. So look out for that. And I'm really glad you mentioned the post halftime, because I actually asked Drinkwitz because I was curious. It really looked like things just kind of fell apart from Mizzou after the second half, and it kind of did, and he kind of admitted Drinkwitz essentially said, yeah, we lost our composure. Like the coaches have to do a better job of just adjusting, during halftime. And because essentially what happened was Florida went on a long touchdown drive coming out of the second half, and Mizzou went 2-and-out. And at that point, it was a 3-possession game, and it was pretty much game over. So I think that's kind of what happened. You look at maybe the offensive line. Mizzou's offensive line coming into the season was a huge question mark. You graduated three guys, or you lost at least three guys who were on at least NFL rosters or practice squads, including Asir Durant, who was with the Chiefs. So people are like, we don't really know what we got in this. And they've been a pleasant surprise, but essentially they had, three players who were either injured or ineffectiveness. Zeke Powell started, but then Bobby Lawrence came in, and then the left guard and the right tackle both were out from Mizzou, and then you essentially had a true freshman and a redshirt freshman come in. So, and the thing that struck out to me rewatching that game on Sunday, it's the offensive line was just it was bad out there. Bazelak didn't have much time to throw. They were getting a push in recent games, and it just wasn't there for Larry Roundtree, which is why I think Drinkwitz kind of went away from the running game. So. Yeah, I mean, it starts in the trenches in college football, right? So I think that was the biggest thing. I think this bye week comes at a really nice time for Mizzou just to heal up on that offensive line. And so, well, overall, I mean, in terms of talking 2 and 3, I think you're very happy with where Mizzou is at, especially with the rest of the schedule. Because, Blair, I really don't think 500 is out of reach here, because you play Georgia, but then you essentially get 4 teams. They pretty much the easiest games on your schedule in South Carolina, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. And I think if you go 3-1 in those final 4 games, and you're looking at a 5-5 season, and I think if you polled Mizzou fans before the season, would you take 5-5 in this COVID riddled season? I think 90+% of fans would take that at 5-5. So I think. You feel good. Maybe you're humbled a little bit against Florida. You're not quite there at the top 10 level of the SEC, but if you're a Mizzou fan, I mean, I'd be feeling real good right now with Drinkwitz.
Yeah, I was going to say 5. If it ends up 5-5, at least 5-5, that's with a first year coach. That would be terrific. Vahe, what have you made of the Tigers? I know that you and I try to catch these games when we can, but I think the LSU and the Kentucky wins changed the narrative for me on Missouri. I didn't know how to feel after the first 2 games. Expected but somewhat competitive loss to Alabama. But then they go to Tennessee, and it's I know it was close to being they were close to being in the game in the second half, but it ended up being 35-12. Then the LSU and Kentucky games happened, and so. Where are you with Drinkwitz and the Tigers this season?
Well, I love the way Souichi sort of summed it up, and I like how you put it too, Blair, that it changed the narrative. And I think for me, those 2 games, maybe the term I'd use to add to yours is, change the foundation of how I looked at it a little bit. I felt like, and Souichi did a really good job spelling this out in his game stories, the fact and analysis, the fact that those wins were kind of generated in different ways with responses to the moment and responses to what they were up against. And by the way, after schedule shuffling and all these kind of weird things, really spoke to me about Drinkwitz's impact on the team and ability to connect with them. So I really expected more out of Florida because of that. I do think, and as our buddy and colleague Sam Mellinger would put it, there's some aspect of this that's the ballad of the loser. But I do think I would like to have seen the game in which Missouri didn't fumble late in the second quarter, and that brawl didn't happen. I'd like to have seen that second half, despite all the things Souichi noted that they were up against. So I feel better about where the program is in this situation than I expected to, and you add in the fact of at this stage, and then add in the fact that it's all happened in the flux of COVID. And I really tip my cap to Drinkwitz. I feel like it's quite promising.
For sure. Then the last couple of years of Barry Odom's regime, when they couldn't beat Kentucky, they were having a hard time against the better teams in the SEC. But we'll see. Look, they're obviously their most difficult game remaining is the next one, right after the open week. They Georgia, but that's the only ranked team left on the schedule. So Missouri should be absolutely competitive in the rest of those games. Okay, we're going to take a break. And speaking of coaches that act demonstratively in a game or on a basketball court, we're going to talk about Billy Tubbs. And when we come back from the break, we're going to, before you hear us talking, you're going to hear the famous Billy Tubbs moment where in 1989, he's asked by the basketball official Hightower to calm the fans down. Oklahoma is playing Missouri. Missouri's off to a great start. The fans are furious at the officiating, and Billy Tubbs is asked by Ed Hightower to go make an announcement over the public address system, and you will hear that after we come back from this break. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
Now Tubbs will head over to midcourt, and he'll take the microphone.
I never referred. Let's hear Billy.
Regardless of how terrible the officiating is, do not throw the
It's going to be a technical on Billy Tubbs. That's unbelievable. He never passes up an opportunity. Did you hear what he said? I love that.
We're back with Souichi Terada and Vahe Gregorian, and you guys just heard Billy Tubbs. I don't think it was Billy Tubbs' greatest moment in coaching, but it was one of the moments that defined him. And Vahe, I don't know if I know this, but were you at that game?
I was not at that game. Jim Thomas of the Post-Dispatch was there, and we were kind of about to do, as the Star I'm sure was at the time, about to get knee deep in some really fascinating stuff that season because Norm was sick, and I think Bob Sunvol got suspended, and suddenly Rich Daly's coaching the team, and it was quite a season, and that was sort of the start of this really worrisome time about Norm's health. The thing, Blair, about Billy that night was that, I was thinking that we link all this together, right? It's sort of a Dan Mullen kind of moment. But Billy's was clever. I mean, that's the thing. Whenever I look at that thing, I must have watched it, 643 times in my life. And I just almost bust a gut every time. It's so ridiculous, so outrageous, so hilarious, and just kind of so Billy. And I remember that he talked about it. I had to cut this out of the story for space, but he talked about it later and said, "You tell me to get a job done, I get it done. They stop throwing stuff."
That's right. That's exactly right. I think the score, if I heard the clip correctly when I was going through it earlier, Missouri was up 18-5, and just playing great on the road. And that was the plane trip, the trip from Columbia to Norman, where Norm suffered his ailment, and so was not on the sideline that night. And as in the case with Dan Mullen, who fired up his Florida Gators, and the Gators played well in the second half, Oklahoma went on to win that game. I think I remember the score is 112-106 in a very typical Big 8 basketball game for the times. And so Vahe and I were – what was also I find interesting about that moment is that was about the time both of us started covering the sort of the college basketball, the college sports scene. You in St. Louis and me in Kansas City. Yeah. That was my first year at the Star, and I just to get to know people like Billy Tubbs and Norm Stewart and Johnny Orr and Larry Brown had moved on from Kansas, but Roy Williams was in his first year at KU. But it was an incredible time for personalities in the Big Eight, and especially at basketball. And we have purposely kept Souichi Terada, young Souichi, in the conversation to give him a little bit of a flavor of what it was like to deal with these coaches, and it was just a remarkable time. And all of them, I couldn't wait to go to games because these coaches would be antagonistic toward each other, visibly, demonstratively. I mean, they'd get after it.
They would, and it was, I mean, Souichi, have a seat, lad. just such ridiculous stuff too. I mean, look, just going up to Hilton Coliseum, and Johnny Orr would come out to the Tonight Show theme, right? I mean, here's Johnny, and he would come out. And back then, and maybe it was just for effect, although Hilton Coliseum was always pretty loud. I remember that they were selling earplugs in the concession stands, right? A little bit of effect, and certainly you always needed them at Allen Fieldhouse. But the trifecta of Norm, Johnny, and Blair, you probably can go beyond this, but the one that stood out to me was Norm, Johnny, and Billy Tubbs. The way they all riffed off each other, played off each other. I think I wrote this in the column today that at some point I wasn't quite sure where theater began and reality existed, whether they really did sort of love each other after all and just looked like hate on the court, or if they really just hated each other. And I think over the years that looks a little different, right? They came to have relationships afterward. But the other thing, Souichi, that may surprise you, and Blair and I were lucky to be covering it at this time. The access points were just so different. And I remember it being a time where you knew all the coaches in the Big Eight and you called them directly. And like, I remember Roy calling me back in St. Louis from he was watching his kid's high school game at a gym, calling from a payphone. But I remember Billy, who was born in St. Louis and lived there like 4 years, you call him and he'd always say, "It's always good to hear from my hometown paper."
Yeah. That's you got the voice down pretty good.
Been working on it.
It was good. So his voice was compared to Jack Nicholson. I think in the inflection it was Jack Nicholson like, more so than in the actual sound of the voice.
The cackle was kind of part of it. It was right after that.
Well, I can remember at the old Big Eight basketball tournament at Kemper Arena, the famous media hospitality rooms. Billy would be in there, and having beers with writers and staff members, and holding court. It was just something that just unthinkable today that something like that could happen.
Absolutely. And Barry Switzer just popping in, his son coming in and playing piano.
Yep.
Oh, God.
Yep.
We're at the point where even I know all these names, and I'm like, oh, Barry Switzer. Okay, let's do this.
Now you're talking.
Yeah. The other thing that, we've talked about the personalities, and those were obviously it was Normus. He was a very successful coach, right? He changed Oklahoma basketball, made it a national power in the 80s, a feared team. They've got to the 1988 championship game, had bludgeoned every opponent until they got to Kansas. And it was just Billy's misfortune to have to play Kansas and Danny Manning in Kemper Arena on championship night. And I'll never forget hearing this, some 30 years later, just recently, actually, Larry Brown telling a story about Manning had picked up I don't know if it was his third foul early in the second half or something. And Manning had gotten in foul trouble 2 years earlier in the Final Four, fouled out of the Final Four game, just changed the nature of KU's game against Duke in the national semifinals. And Larry Brown was assured by the officials then that Danny Manning's not fouling out of this game. And Billy Tubbs heard it, and so of course he held on to that the rest of his life. That of course Danny's not fouling out. And
oh my God, that's just the right combination of ingredients there, isn't it? Oh my God, Blair, I've probably told you this before, but as it happened, that was the first NCAA title game I ever went to. I was an intern at the Post-Dispatch. But a friend of mine, and you know him now, Tom Ojakshian, with ESPN, called me on game day and had a ticket. And I was like, well, what is this Final Four opportunity I hear of? And I just drove over and found some place to park by the Golden Ox, wedged in between like 6 cars. And it was like walking into this magic curtain opening. I mean, I just remember that was the game 50-50 at halftime. And obviously, just an amazing. I can't remember if there's been a closer to campus home crowd for a title game. You might remember that, Blair. But
you'll remember Butler playing in Indianapolis. Gordon Hayward's team. But no, that was so unusual. And in the Midwest Regional Final that year, which was played in Pontiac, Michigan, was Kansas versus. Yes, in the Silver Dome, Kansas versus Kansas State. So the winner was going to play pretty close to home in the Final Four that year. Now, Billy was amazing. His teams that included players like Harvey Grant and Mookie Blaylock, Ricky Grace, they were scoring and non-conference opponents overwhelmed a non-conference opponent, scoring 150, 160 points a game. And Billy always wanted to try to get to 200 points. He wanted to be the first team to ever reach 200 points in a game. And so they would press and play starters long after, a game was in hand just so he could do that. And even though it never happened, it wasn't for lack of trying by Billy. So,
and Billy just happened to – I can't remember the sequence exactly, Blair, but it was, 84, 85 when the 3-point line came into play.
About then.
And shot clock changes and stuff. And so that really played into Billy's hands, and Billy certainly embraced that notion. I think he once said that the perfect game would be to win 200-100.
That's right. Man. He was something else. And Vahe, as you noted in your column, it's been quite the year for not losing basketball coach. Listen, losing sports stars in every sport, right? It's just been a tough year for that. But college basketball hasn't been immune to this with what's the list? Eddie Sutton and John Thompson. Who am I missing?
Well, it's funny. Eddie and John were the ones that first came to mind for me. And then when I checked back with you yesterday, you right away mentioned Lute Olson and a guy who was near and dear to me also was Lou Henson. I covered the Illinois beat at the Post-Dispatch one year, and knew Lou over the years, and he was a great guy, and that's quite a crew. It's a lot of Final Fours, a lot of charisma, and a lot of influence on the game that's all gone in this dreadful year.
Right. Okay, let's wake up Souichi and Souichi. I can't wait for the day 35 years from now when you're speaking with someone about this time in your life. I'll be sure to tune in. So thanks for hanging out, lad.
We'll see what medium we're in at that point. Maybe it'll be something. Maybe it'll be in your own living room or something. A virtual me just speaking.
That's what it'll be. That's right. We'll all beam in to your living room, and you'll make sure Vahe and I are there. Make us listen to it.
Exactly right.
All right, guys. Really enjoyed the conversation. Vahe, Souichi, great talking to you, and we will do it again soon.
Thanks, Blair.
All right.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to our production staff of Derek Donovan, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, Chris Fickett, and Savannah Smith. A tip of the cap to Souichi Terada and Vahe Gregorian for stopping by and talking college sports. Links to their stories can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Hey, we got another deal for you, especially for those who want to deep dive into the Stars' terrific Chiefs coverage. For a limited time, you can subscribe to Sports Pass for 99 cents a month. That's right, 99 pennies a month. After 3 months, it auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless you tell us to cancel. How do you get it? Well, you go to kansascity.com/sportspass2020. That's kansascity.com/sportspass2020. Do you want more than just sports coverage? I know I do. Check out the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports news, features, commentary, and analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus additional news, sports, and business coverage with the e-edition. The details for all of these deals can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And I know that's a lot of dots and dashes, and if you're having trouble finding any of these offers, you send me an email, bkerkhoff@kcstar.com, and I'll get you to the right place. Whether it's a Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best news and sports coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Thursday with another episode.